Hey everyone. Okay, so we talked about what we need to know about candida, yeast overgrowth, whatever you want to call it, and how it can impact your child's learning, emotional regulation, ability to focus, their food cravings, all that type of stuff. So, what I want to chat about today is number one, what people have messaged me about, and I was planning on doing anyway, is causes of yeast and candida and so forth. And it's not always as simple as you might think, as I'm going to talk about. So let's get into it. So first of all, number one is, and not necessarily number one cause, but first thing is if mom had candida or poor health, gut health, I should say, during pregnancy or at the time of delivery. So that's going to have a massive impact, as well as if she was on antibiotics. I know that was certainly my story. I was on countless rounds of antibiotics for strep throat as a kid and ear infections and so forth. So antibiotic use as well by the child. So if they've had an ear infection or ear infection, strep throat, pneumonias, all that type of stuff will compromise their gut health and make them more vulnerable to developing overgrowth of candida or yeast. Our modern diet is really high in sugar, carbohydrates, and processed foods. So as we know from last time, sugar and carbohydrates feeds the yeast and basically causes it to proliferate. Can't talk today. And processed foods can even impact that as well in different ways because of the preservatives and chemicals and so forth in that. In fact, even pesticides can have an effect on killing off beneficial bacteria and therefore creating an optimal environment for the other stuff to kind of take over. Water with chlorine or fluoride, that will have a massive impact on not only the overgrowth of yeast, but also killing off certain bacteria that is really beneficial and so forth. So you definitely want to get a filter or do something like reverse osmosis. I love the AquaTrue. Some people like not the Brita, the Berkey. There's a lot of different options, but you really want to filter out that chlorine and fluoride. Another factor is birth control. So if mom was on birth control for, say, years before pregnancy and so forth, that is going to basically optimize, if we use that word, the growth of yeast and candida in her gut. And as I've talked about before, when kids come through the birth canal, they're actually getting inoculated with their first basically the bacteria and so forth that's in mom's birth canal is going to be the bacteria that or the gut microbiome that they are going to have in their gut as well. So yes, as we all know, vaginal birth is optimal if we can, if that is what happens, but vaginal birth can also bring along that all those things are passed through to the child as well. So that's a factor. And then the other factor that gets overlooked a lot, and a lot of people I work with will just kind of go on yeast busters and different anti-yeast protocols. And some of them have done like countless yeast protocols during, the last few years or whatever. They'll always tell me this and they'll say, but their yeast keeps coming back. Maybe they're doing the organic acids test. You have to clear metals. So if your child has heavy metal toxicity or high levels of metals, particularly mercury, then you're probably going to have a really hard time clearing yeast and getting it to just stay away. So you need to work on heavy metal detoxification. And I want to state, I highly recommend do not do heavy metal detoxification on your own, because it is something that has to be done carefully. I don't do that in my program. I refer out if we think we need to do that, because you definitely want to be working with someone who specializes in heavy metal chelation therapy. But that's definitely a factor as well. However, we do work on gentle detoxification. And the other piece is that when we're doing heavy metal detoxification is we want to make sure that we're optimizing our minerals, because we can't just clear something out. If we don't have adequate minerals, we're creating an environment for those heavy metals to deposit themselves because there's not enough good minerals to take the place in those tissues and so forth. So enough about that, because we're not talking about that today, or not supposed to be. You might be wondering now, okay, what are the signs of my child having candida? So I'm going to run through the key ones. It is a bit of a list, but not insane, but I'm going to go through them. And I want you in the comments below, whether you're watching the live or the replay, to let me know which ones apply to your child or children or whatever. So number one, when I see picky eating, craving sweets, craving carbs, only wanting to eat carbs and sweets and so forth, that's a huge red flag for me. Number two, poor focus, memory issues, brain fog, being kind of spacey. All of those are also flags for candida. And I just want to add before I continue, the more that your child has, the more likely they have an overgrowth of yeast or candida. Other things are like skin rashes. So in babies, this can show up as diaper rash. It could be cradle cap. In kids, it could be just kind of random rashes. It could be eczema, even things like psoriasis, all that type of stuff. Gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea. That's a huge flag that yeast could be at play. And then hyperactivity, especially like silliness after a child has eaten a high carb, high sugar meal. What's really fascinating, as I've said before, right? Some of these kids can even appear kind of drunk because the yeast, when it ferments, releases an alcohol. And some of these people have actually blown over on breathalyzers when they never actually had a glass of alcohol. So any kind of fungal infections, whether it's the nails, the genitals, the feet, the tongue, so thrush, any of that type of stuff, that's a huge flag for sure. Mood swings. Is your child worse on damp, rainy days? If that's the case, you really want to look into fungus. It could be yeast like candida, or it could be mold. And then just stuff like anxiety, irritability, crankiness, insomnia, depression, all of that type of stuff. And then other not so, I don't want to say not so common, but ones that are easier to link to other things too. So it's not necessarily defining, but is respiratory issues like coughing and wheezing, headaches, reoccurring ear infections, or ear issues are reasons to look into yeast or candida as well. So at this point, you may be wondering, okay, what do I do if I suspect my child has yeast? Where do I start? So number one, you do want to do, you do want to focus on diet. However, I'm not a big fan of insane restrictive candida diets. And I mean, obviously it's a candida diet, but you don't want to do something insanely rigid where your child is like going to end up in ketosis if it's not necessary. Because I mean, I find ketogenic diets can be hit or miss with kids. So I'm very careful about when we use that. But you do want to try to phase out excess sugar and carbohydrates and try to bring in other foods that they're going to be, they're going to eat that's higher in protein and fat, that's going to fill them up, make them feel good, but isn't going to feed the yeast. And so you want to do this gradually for most kids, right? If you take a kid who wants to eat nothing but Kraft dinner pizza and I don't know, toast, then, if you just try and phase all of that out at once, it's probably going to be a bit of a nightmare. You can do that. Some parents do decide to go that route that I work with, but you have to be really prepared. You have to know your child and how that's going to be received. The other factor is that I really like to look into if there's picky eating. This is also why you don't want to just dive into a very restrictive diet, because you can end up with more deficiencies if they start kind of doing not a hunger strike, but kind of sorta. You want to address the deficiencies that are contributing to the picky eating, maybe use some antimicrobials or yeast busters to kind of support them through that so that they're more easily able to crowd out those few foods that they will eat that are high in carbs. And of course, we want to address retained reflexes that contribute to picky eating, because picky eating is not just biochemical, it's also neurological. If there is retained reflexes, an overdeveloped brain hemisphere, anything like that, that can cause the volume on their sensory system to be up way too high, and for foods to taste disgusting that maybe aren't that strong tasting, or foods to taste too mushy, too soft, all that type of stuff. So I do like to caution parents against yeast protocols that are number one, too aggressive, and number two, just kind of cookbook, recipe book protocols. You want to work with someone who is aware of your child's bi-individual needs, their levels of sensitivity, all that type of stuff. Antifungals are helpful, but it really depends on the constitution and level of sensitivity of your child. And absolutely the most important thing is that before you start yeast busting, you want to focus on drainage and detox. I know way too many people who do, myself included, whenever I was younger and doing it on myself. I did a yeast protocol and it was an absolute nightmare. I felt like I had a terrible flu for 6 weeks and later learned that it's because I was not draining and detoxing. And that was just exasperating things. And I really don't know that it really ended up helping that much. In fact, I ended up with a kidney infection not long after. And I'm not saying it's linked, but it was, my body was just under a lot of stress. So all that to say, let me know in the comments below. Do you think your child has yeast? What signs do they have? And what is one thing that you can do today to start tackling it in a sane way? Because that's what it's all about. My 6-month program is how can we make changes to our kids' brain in a way that's sustainable? Because if we try to do insane things all at once, we're probably going to get overwhelmed. We might have mutiny, and then we're going to throw in the towel and we're not going to have success. So if you want to learn more about my program, book a clarity call. And if you join my free training at the next Friday, so October 28th, the biology of learning and behavior, I'm going to be talking all about how gut bacteria, toxicity, nutrition, all that type of stuff has a massive impact on your child's ability to learn, focus, and self-regulate, and how it's very often overlooked and why you really do not want to overlook that. So thanks for watching, everyone. I will post links for both of those things in the comments below. Have a fantastic day.